You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here. I'm so excited you could join us bright and early Monday morning. I had an amazing weekend. The weather was spectacular. We were able to set up a little daybed. Fortunately, we got a backyard. We could hang out. And my wife, Sandra, bought a bubble machine for my daughter. And I did create a TikTok. So if you're looking for an excuse to not work right now, jump over to TikTok. Go to my profile at Watson Estates. There is something funny about watching a grown man dance around and play around in bubbles. Go check it out. You're going to love it. But I hope you guys had a wonderful weekend, and we're back bright and early to talk about some news as it relates to real estate here in Toronto. This is Toronto's #1 real estate podcast for a reason. We're #1 on Google Podcasts, and we're continuing to grow. I'm just astonished by the outpouring of support and comments and love. Thank you guys. We're going to continue to put out great articles, and today we're going to dive into some pretty cool stuff too. I want to start talking off about politics because that's definitely a way to get friends. And we're going to talk about whether we need to currently bail out municipalities in Ontario. We're going to talk about the crisis that they're facing, and I think is becoming more and more prominent. And what is a real estate showing like during a pandemic? Maybe you're sitting at home and you're wondering, what are my poor friends out there looking for real estate having to deal with? Well, I found, I think, my favorite article so far that talks about that. And so I'm going to share with you some little more information on what that would look like if you did decide to go out and purchase a property right now. And the last question I want to talk about is Airbnb. We're starting to see some information coming out of China about their Airbnb numbers over the last few weeks. And so I want to ask the question, will we see Airbnb and short-term rentals come back after COVID-19 decides to go away, if it ever decides to go away? But we're seeing some really good results. And ultimately, will the short-term rental come back? So as mentioned, we're going to jump right into talking about municipalities. And I also want to talk about politics in general. And before we kind of jump into the municipalities, I also want to talk about Doug Ford. Because there's, as you guys are familiar, recently we've seen a lot of money being given out. This article is called Coronavirus, Ontario Announces Pandemic Pay Increase for Frontline Workers. You've probably heard this. You'd have to be living under a rock to not hear this. But there has been a pandemic pay, quote, raise available to frontline workers. So this is the article. The Ontario government has announced it will be providing frontline workers with a temporary pandemic pay raise amid the novel, wow, I can't read this morning, coronavirus outbreak. The increase will provide $4 per hour extra on top of existing wages. Employees working over 100 hours per month will also receive a lump sum payment of $250 per month for the next 4 months. Meaning eligible employees working on average of 40 hours a week will receive a total of $35.60 in additional wages. So that is a thank you, as it appears, from Doug Ford. What he said is, these people put themselves in harm's way to care for our sick and vulnerable citizens, Premier Doug Ford said in a statement. I am truly grateful, as are the people of Ontario, for their service, and it's time we give something back to those who sacrifice so much day in and day out. Dougie, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay, Dougie? This is not the same premiere we saw a few months ago. And it has got a lot of people turning their heads. And so I actually saw another article that I just wanted to mention the title. I think this was in the... I can't remember where I saw this. I'd have to pull it up again. But I saw an article that was saying, I hope that, like St. Paul, Doug Ford has truly had his conversion on the road to Damascus. Readers debate Ontario's response to COVID-19, plus other letters to the author. And that was a Globe and Mail. That's where we got it. We got that from the Globe and Mail. But that is so funny. So if you don't know the story about St. Paul, finally my church lessons are coming in here. So what that guy did, by the way, Paul, he was originally named Saul, and he would persecute Christians. And he was like the biggest persecutor of Christians in the early church. And ultimately, this conversion wasn't just a conversion of to stop killing Christians, but also to become a Christian. So in theory, this guy switched full circle. So the topic is, in other words, did Doug Ford make a complete switch over into now supporting a liberal agenda of spending and providing money to services and supports? And so what I wanted to do before I talk about our next topic, and we're going to talk about property tax and municipalities, because this is where it's going to come right down into your face, and we're going to have very practical implications of these things. But I just want to start off by saying, in my opinion, I don't think that that's what this is. He hasn't changed his views. And in fact, the way I kind of look at this is actually reinforces a right-wing view. And let me kind of walk through this. This is going to be a terrible analogy, but it's bright and early in the morning. I'll bet you some of you are still sleeping when I'm filming this podcast. So think of it like this. Let's say you have an umbrella, right, for a rainy day. Again, a terrible example. I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but why not? And you were in the liberal perspective, at least from the eyes of a right-wing person, would say, well, you're going to rent that umbrella every single day because eventually it will rain. And if it rains, you want to make sure you're protected. Where what this has just done is it's shown now that there is a crisis where spending is required, because typically on the conservative worldview, they would want to support local business, which in turn supports individuals. But now individuals are struggling and the businesses are not in a position to support those individuals. And so we have to have a direct relationship with government. And so what's now happened is the conservatives here have decided now is the day to pull out our umbrella and protect ourselves for this rainy day. And so what it does is it proves to people like myself who are typically on the side of let's not spend money unless it's necessary. And these services, as important as they are, government is by design meant to protect people in an emergency and to make sure everyone plays fairly, not necessarily to just throw money at people. What this proves is that you can pull out an umbrella during a rainy day and save yourself paying the rent that entire time up until that point. So anyways, that again is a terrible example and I apologize, but that's just kind of a different perspective. And I think that it's a little short-sighted to think that he has changed, because this, you'll notice that everybody right now is in agreement that money needs to be spent to keep our markets up, to keep people working, to keep people supported, because we don't want the house of cards to fall over, right? So we all agree. So if you're expecting Doug Ford to agree with his base, I think that's a little short-sighted. Anyways, all of that to say that clearly at the federal level as well, we've seen at the federal level, and here at the provincial level, there is now complete consensus of throwing money. Right? We have an opportunity now to collect money and bailouts. And we did our last podcast was talking about another bailout, which was for commercial businesses and landlords and tenants. And there's just money for everybody, right? So now what I want to talk about is the municipalities, because this is where you're paying your property taxes. This article comes from Brampton Focus, which I love how the Brampton articles is reporting on the Mississauga mayor's tweets here, because I think that's really funny given all the disputes that they've gone through. But anyways, this is what it said. So the article is called Mississauga Mayor Crombie Rebukes 17% Property Tax Increase. So I'm going to read some of these big highlights. And what I like about this article is she's detailed and not to the point of hurting herself. Actually, the detail gives clarity on the positions that municipalities are currently in. And then we're going to kind of summarize this with what she said and what I think is going to happen out of it. So this is the article and just the highlights from, not everything. Let's talk finances, specifically municipal finances. You may have seen recently that cities across Canada are calling on the provincial and federal governments to provide them with assistance. Federally, the request is for a minimum of $10 billion up to $15 billion to cover operating shortfalls. And just for any of you who are wondering, that is assuming a lockdown of 6 months, okay? This is a big number and a big ask, but it's an important ask. Let me try to explain why cities need this money now. Unlike the federal or provincial governments, cities operate most like a business. To be exact, we are in the service delivery business, providing hundreds of services to residents, from fire, ambulance, police, water, transit, roads, The services cities provide impact you most on a daily basis. Cities don't budget the way the federal and provincial governments do. At the beginning of each year, we calculate how much delivering services will cost, and then pretty much from there they backdate it. And they also talk about where 60% of it comes from the property taxes, and the remainder comes from user fees like transit, rec center, or rec revenues, fines, debt, etc. The property tax is one of the most inefficient taxes there is. I thought that was really funny coming from a mayor saying that the property tax is inefficient. But her argument I kind of get. So she says it's essentially an income tax. I disagree with that analogy, but she's trying to relate it. And the talking is this. What she says is you don't realize the value, so you don't actually get the money out of your property until you sell it. But yet the taxes are based on that increasing amount, which is unfair, which is why I don't think it lines up perfectly with income tax. Because income tax, at least you have revenues coming in to kind of, but I think you get the point here is people don't just have their money, like just because your property went up 500,000 doesn't necessarily mean that your bank account went up 500,000. During these tough times, property taxes cannot be raised without limit. It is not fair and it's not an efficient way to make up revenue shortfalls. There was a little image on here, which I thought was pretty cool, where they kind of linked some of the bigger city challenges, the shortfalls of their operating budget. Mississauga pops up like a sore thumb, which is no wonder that Mayor Crombie is the one that made this article, but their shortfall is 16.6% for 2020. And then, but don't you guys worry in Toronto, 14.6%. You guys are not far behind. That is kind of, it seems almost like a top list of challenges. And those are two big GTA cities that are on there. So there's clearly a challenge. And the fact that Toronto and Mississauga, our biggest local cities, are on the map is a problem. Legally, we are not permitted by the province to run deficits. Our debt levels are capped as well. Guys, at least I've realized, I'm dumber than a lot of people out there, but I did not realize just how rough things are going to get on the municipalities. But I am hearing this over and over and over, and running a deficit is simply off limits for municipalities. And actually, this is interesting too. Their debt levels are also capped. So everything is capped with these guys. They're running on a much tighter. So the thing is how are we going to protect these guys, right? Like they're now in a position where they need money, right? They need that bailout. Without provincial or federal assistance this year, Mississauga projects a 17% property tax increase next year. The numbers are similar in cities across Canada. Okay, guys, I just looked at the numbers. They're not that serious, but they're high. But Mississauga is really high. Now we run a tight ship at the city and have a strong reserves, but by law, many of these cannot be used for anything but the things we're collecting for. For instance, development charges must be used to provide infrastructure to new communities. It cannot be used to cover operating losses. That's interesting. So even though you've got money, if you got money designated for one thing, you can't use it for another. So we could borrow more debt, but our infrastructure deficits is already $274 million. So they could borrow money, but they can't move money around as easily, right? They don't have the same flexibility as the federal and provincial government. So their hands are tied, which is starting to sound more and more like a business, funny enough. Mississauga has taken measures to scale back and do our part. We have instituted a hiring freeze and unfortunately had to lay off 2,000 employees. That's not an unusual story. You've probably heard of municipalities laying everybody off and then people getting so pissed at them. But what do you expect? This is not something anyone wanted to do, but it was necessary and financially prudent. And I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. There are many unknowns at this time. For instance, even when we begin to reopen our city, will transit ridership return? If ridership does return, will physical distancing measures mean we'll have to run twice as many buses? So there's so many good questions. We're not asking for a bailout, but an investment in essential services that are keeping our economy and our country running. It's like the guy that's trying to sell you a TV. That's not a cost. That's an investment in your future, in the entertainment of your children. No, that's a bailout. Damn, Donnie, that's so... Bonnie. I called her Donnie. Talking too much about Doug Ford and Bonnie. Yeah, Bonnie, that's so depressing this early in the morning, but I mean, it's very interesting to see the municipalities' perspective on everything. And so here's my takeaway out of all of this, guys. Based on the willingness for the federal and provincial government to give out money and for the dire straits that the municipal governments are in, all these challenges they're facing in the range of 10 to 15 billion, and I'd say it's conservative because that's 6 months. I would say that you can expect a bailout for municipalities of that amount, 10 to 15 billion, probably 15 billion because they're feeling generous. Or if they don't, a big old fat property tax increase in 2021. In either case, I feel bad for the people who live in Mississauga because that's going to get rough. And in fact, if there is bailouts, then that actually incentivizes municipalities to spend money, right? Because it's like, oh, well, whatever we do. It's kind of like this idea of you're too big to fail, right? Or possibly you could have a combination of both where you've got maybe a partial property tax increase and also bailout. But I tend to think that they're being overly generous. And we've also seen articles in the last week or so talking about in Vancouver and BC how there's other big cities that are asking for bailouts too. So this is not local. This is across the country. I'm going to leave it there for that particular topic. Very interesting stuff, and definitely not a way to make friends at the dinner table talking about politics. So we're going to move right along, and I want to jump into the process of buying a property right now. I found an article we're going to get into in just a second, but before there, I want to talk about this article, which kind of prefaces it. I think it's a kind of a good start up here. This article comes from Toronto Stories, Real Estate of the Union. So clever. I wish I was that clever. Taking stock of the industry in the time of COVID-19. The article says, Find a safe place for the sellers to be so the home is empty. Get a photographer, inspector, and stager in without breaking physical distancing measures. Repurpose a sold sign from a previous property because the sign company is shut down. Set up a showing that includes disclaimers about COVID-19 symptoms. Offer sanitizer and masks. Wipe down anything a buyer touches. Send agreements electronically. Make Zoom calls and go over details. Close virtually. That's really cool. I like that they kind of like summarize everything in one paragraph. But I found a really cool article that came out of a company. Actually, there's a CBC, but they were talking specific to London. They're probably some kind of local journalist. And the title was, Realtors are still selling properties in the pandemic, but it's as if the houses were a museum. What I like about this one is it talks about the buyer experience, and it does a really good job. It talks about other things that we haven't mentioned in our podcast and kind of gives a different angle. So I really like it. So the sub-headline is, showings may have slowed to a trickle, but people still need a place to live. This is the article. When it comes to selling a home in a pandemic, London real estate broker Robert DiLoretto says you have to treat the experience, quote, as if the home were a museum. Everyone wears masks and gloves and nobody touches anything. Jumping down a little bit, you're going to walk into the house, stay on the carpets, don't touch the furniture, don't touch the kitchen counters, don't touch the faucets, don't touch anything. Just look. It's like a kid in a candy shop. You just look. It goes on to say the showings have slowed down, it's a quote, but the buyer's seriousness, because they've been prepared in a different way, is a lot more serious. This is a good point. This is part of why I like this article. This is a very good point. If someone is walking through your property right now, that shows a level of seriousness. It's kind of like, it's akin to when you're holding an open house and it's raining. People are like, oh, it's raining, I don't want to hold an open house. And the big sell right now of the brokers for people trying to encourage people to use open houses to generate businesses, well, I'll tell you what, if it's raining and someone shows up to your open house, then they are a serious buyer. And it's the same case here, I would say even to a larger extent. With open houses banned by emergency provincial order and realtors being urged to stop all face-to-face business, realtors have to find other ways to do business because people still need places to live. So they've started relying more on technology, I'm not going to get into the technology thing. We've talked about that time and again. DiLoretto said while realtors spend a lot more time online or on the phone these days, one thing hasn't changed, and that's the fact that buyers still need to see a property in person before they buy it. This is why I don't like to talk about the technology thing too much, because that's true. People can still tour a home they want to buy. They just have to do it surgically and in more ways than one. Not only do they have to wear a mask and gloves, they have to keep their visits short and bring as few people with them as possible, which could involve going one at a time. We haven't talked about this, depending on the seller's comfort, right? The seller calls the shots. They also have to fill out a declaration they are not showing any of the signs of symptoms. Shoes are taken off before they enter the home. Visits are kept to 30 minutes or less. And no using the bathroom. I love that interaction that I have with clients when we're looking at properties. I need to use the bathroom. Guys, on a good day, I use the bathrooms. Just relax, be respectful, use the bathrooms. But anyways, I think that's really funny. So right now, no using the bathroom. We don't want anyone using the bathroom. We don't allow kids to come. That's also interesting. It makes sense, and it's probably actually a relief for a lot of sellers because kids are super destructive. That's why we ask the homeowners to have everything open for us, right? Doors are left open, so we just look and make sure we don't have to touch anything. I bring a box of Lysol wipes with me, so if I have to open a door, I open it with a Lysol wipe. You might think with all these added precautions, the real estate business would slow to a trickle. This comes back down to London, Ontario. And I thought, you know what, I'd add this in here because we're talking about this article. Give them a thumbs up. Sales tumbled by as much as 55% in Toronto as the epidemic took hold, but not London. In fact, according to London St. Thomas Real Estate Association's numbers from last month, home sales in the region rose by 13% over the previous year. And anyways, shout out to my friends over in London. I did an interview about a month, maybe a month and a half ago now, with a guy named Matt McKeever. Go check it out if you haven't. He invests a lot in London. I'm sure he's doing great with all this increases. And it's another pitch in favor of Southern Ontario where prices are cheaper and the sun shines a little bit brighter. But what I want to talk about here, just before I kind of move on, is just, I got to give a disclaimer. My lawyer, who I haven't talked to because he's probably in isolation, has advised me that I shouldn't be giving advice. That's ironic. But here is my non-advice. Don't sell. Just wait, guys. Just hold those properties and don't sell. On the flip side, I wanted to share a side opportunity that I haven't really mentioned that came out of conversations with another client, actually, in whom we're going to be putting in an offer on a property today. I think actually as soon as I'm done here, I'm probably going to be rolling around another offer. But there's two opportunities I'm finding. Number one, there's buyer opportunities, right? There's an opportunity for buyers who don't need to sell, okay? And that's one we've talked about in the past. But there was one that came out of a conversation with some clients the other day that I thought I would shed light on because it just kind of dawned on me. I'm like, this is actually true. And I actually think there's a lot of people taking advantage of this that you might not realize. I think this is our prominent buyer, actually. There is a trend right now where people who are in condos, I'm talking millennials that own their first property, want to get into or are open to the idea of investing in properties, and they don't know how to do it, and yet they need to upsize into some kind of low-rise units, so more expensive areas that have been hardest hit by these price declines. And so I was getting to thinking, you know what? Realistically, we don't want to sell right now. But we do want to buy, right? Because in general, you've got a huge price discount. You've got no competition in a market that surely will have competition very soon. And so the other opportunity that I never really thought of that I want to share with you today is this idea of refinancing your property and renting it out for the short term, right? You can and when I say short term, I mean you're going into a long term. You're not going to get it on an Airbnb right now, but if you can rent it for even a year, maybe this is an opportunity for buyers who's always kind of thought about renting a property. But this only will work, by the way, on people who have had their property for a little bit of time, because you're going to need 20% in that home in order to refinance it. But if you've owned your, let's say, condo downtown for a little while and it's gone up in value enough that you have room to borrow, buy what you need, and then rent out your current place, that is a great opportunity. And so those are the buyers that I think are going to benefit most from everything going on right now. Okay, let's move on from there. And I want to talk about our third question, which talks about Airbnb. And everything is speculating, right? We're speculating everything. But this is why I like looking at China, because China is slightly ahead of us. Obviously, their culture is vastly different from ours. However, they have a lot of similarities, right? For example, they have Airbnbs. And so what I want to talk about today is what is happening in their Airbnb. I saw a really cool article come out of Global News that I want to share with you. The article is this: Airbnb bookings in China up 200% in April. 200%. All right, here's what it says. While the coronavirus pandemic has frozen global travel and hit the travel industry hard, data from home sharing startup Airbnb Inc. shows the number of domestic bookings in China for the first half of April were up more than 200% compared with the same period in March. Data from AirDNA, a separate analytics firm, showing the number of bookings for the week of April 13th in 10 big Chinese cities, including Shanghai and Gaozhou. I always see that one, but I don't even know how to pronounce it. Guangzhou, something like that. We're up nearly 80% from the week of March 16th, which AirDNA chief executive Scott Shatford, what a name, said was the bottom for that market. So here's the thing. Even though you're up 200%, it's coming off the bottom. Still, that's about half the booking seen the week of January 6th, right? So we're still only halfway to the best scenario. Shatford said his firm's data includes bookings from international travelers staying in China. AirDNA data also shows the daily average rate in China from May onward is similar to what it was in 2019. So that's interesting, right? The rates on Airbnbs have not gone down. Shatford said Airbnb owners do not offer big discounts online to lure travelers the way hotels might. But here is what I find super interesting, which is a great point. And this guy's name is Paul McGuire. Probably talks about who he is somewhere in here, but actually it does here. So after we're given the all clear and you're ready to venture out of your home and into other cities, where are you going to want to stay? Said Paul McGuire, managing partner of Iron Edge VC, whose fund owns Airbnb and is looking to buy more on the secondary market. So he's obviously got a conflict there, but it's a very good point. Watch this. You'd be more likely to opt for a short-term house rental than checking into a big Marriott filled with hundreds of strangers. Good point. I agree. That is true. So this is a bit of good news for people who plan on doing Airbnbs or currently own Airbnbs, but we do know from past podcasts, and go back and check those out. We've done a bunch of them kind of as we go. We talk about also how the rental market is going to get an influx of rentals going into the long-term market. We've seen about a 50% decline from at least what I'm seeing from my shoes in the amount of rents that are kind of rolling over, that leases are happening, but they're still happening out there. But we can expect rent rates to come down, all because of Airbnbs hitting the market. But if in fact Airbnbs become profitable again, and there's a way to slowly convert them back, in theory, if we follow what China is doing, they'll start to come back because it is very profitable. And for people who do Airbnbs, there's a reason. But here's the kicker. Airbnbs, they're not legal in Toronto. They're, guys, we're not technically supposed to be doing Airbnbs, even though they're going on. It's supposed to be in your primary residence. You got to pay fees, and nobody's following the rules. I'm sure that that'll all pick up again, but we can't be doing that while the coronavirus is in place. So tread carefully. And that's it for today as far as the content goes. I just want to thank you guys again for tuning into our morning podcasts. We're going to continue to put out fantastic content. Make sure you leave us a thumbs up and a like if you're following us on iTunes. And actually, I think Stitcher allows for ratings as well. I don't even think I have any ratings on Stitcher. If any of you are using Stitcher. And I also have actually been uploading this content on YouTube. And that, I'm surprised, has been done very well. And so thank you to our YouTube audiences. You guys are welcome to leave comments as well. Let us know if there's any topics you want us to cover in the coming days. And I will see you guys again tomorrow morning with more. Have a great day. Take care and keep it real.